I'm Joan Bailey, Vice President for Mission and Identity here at the College of New Rochelle. On behalf of our President, Dr. Stephen Sweeney, I welcome you to the College of New Rochelle and tonight's presentation celebrating the 475th anniversary of our foundresses, the Ursulines. This presentation has been supported by the Sister Alice Gowan Lecture Fund, created to honor our scholar-in-residence, Sister Alice Gowan, on the occasion of her 60th anniversary as an Ursuline. Tonight we celebrate the wonderful and courageous women religious and their many contributions to society, the church, to Catholic higher education in America. We especially celebrate our Ursulines, foundresses, and continuing inspiration to our community. Women in Spirit, Catholic Sisters in America, is the traveling museum exhibit mounted by the Leadership Conference of Women Religious and reviews the story of women's religious communities in the United States. Sister Joan Chittister has described it as the visual history of women who made astounding choices at all the crossroads in national history and made them when women were allowed to make few, if any, choices at all. Over and over again, these women chose for tomorrow rather than settle for a comfortable or convenient past. They succeeded because of the courage of women who went where they were told not to go. This exhibit is currently at Ellis Island and will be there until January 22nd. Our presenter this evening, Sister Karen Kennelly, Sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet, is President Emerita of Mount St. Mary's College in Los Angeles. She holds a PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MA in history from the Catholic University of America. She is co-coordinator of the History of Women Religious Conference. She served on the congregational leadership team of her congregation and has been an advisor to the exhibit, Women and Spirit, Catholic Sisters in America. Sister Karen.
Well, I do thank you most sincerely for inviting me to come. It's my very first visit to the College of New Rochelle. And last week, I had the privilege of attending the opening of the exhibit at Ellis Island. I don't need to tell you what a unique site that particular venue is among the chatter at which this particular exhibit will show. The exhibit, as Joan has already mentioned, celebrates the contribution of women religious to American life. And tonight I'd like to take you, it'd be a little too grandiose to say a virtual tour, but I'll do my best. And your own communications people have enhanced our setting here this evening by putting on a series of pictures, not all of which are actually in the exhibit. They took the liberty of sprinkling in a few extra pictures of the Ursulines. So we certainly understand that. The exhibit was conceived of by what's the organization called the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. This group was formed in 1956, and when they invited their various regions that make up the national organization of the conference to come up with suggestions and ideas. This goes back to about the year 2004, with about how the 50th anniversary of the Leadership Conference in 1956 to 2006 might be celebrated. One of the regions came up with the idea of why don't we have an exhibit? Well, that sounds harmless enough, but the total idea actually was, why don't we have an exhibit at the Smithsonian? Well, people thought that was a really good idea. Other regions endorsed it. Great idea, have an exhibit at the Smithsonian. Little dreaming of the obstacles that lay in the way of developing an exhibit of such a nature and quality that it would be accepted by the nation's premier museum to show. And believe me, those of us that got together in the original committee were pretty naive. We had poster paper, butcher paper, and stick-it notes, and we were putting on, what we were going to do this month and next month, and by the next year we have this exhibit. Well, suffice it to say, we learned a great deal. However, we had a really great cause, and we discovered what some of us really were quite convinced of from the outset, but we needed to have it shown to us more convincingly. We had a very powerful story. Not only a powerful story, but a story that had significance for the United States of America. It wasn't just our story or something about the church, or confined in that manner. The cause that we had was to try to dispel some of the stereotypes of nuns that have been propagated by the media. And if possible, somehow to replace these with authentic images of the women who helped shape our nation through lives of prayer. That was hard, but it's such an important aspect of our life. Prayer and service. We thought that once the general public, could see some of the extraordinary deeds accomplished by these very ordinary women, it would encourage us sisters to take heart during what's kind of a trying period of time for sisters, and also to inspire laypersons to reflect on their own potential to love and to serve others in the circumstances of their lives. So we began a 4-year process, which we sustained because of a very deeply held conviction that we had a powerful story to tell. And we needed this strong conviction and all the resources that we brought to it because there were a lot of challenges. I think the biggest challenge was somehow finding a comprehensive perspective from which to tell this story. Many congregations, certainly including the Ursulines in the United States, had told their story through the writing of history and biography. But it was another thing to try to get a comprehensive picture of these congregations. And it was not something that anyone had attempted to do in a published account. So we really were operating from ground zero, you might say. Identifying a storyline that would be true to the contributions that all of these many congregations have made was a huge task in terms of the chronological scope of the story. As the Ursulines here at College of New Rochelle are keenly aware, for the United States, this story really began in 1727. That being the year that the Ursulines arrived in New Orleans, which would become part of territorial United States, even though it was not then part. So there was that chronological scope. Then there were the sheer number of women involved. Now, we've had some argument, including from some of the publications where we published this figure. It seems like a low figure to some, 220,000. We think, and that's the best estimate we can come to, about the number of women who have lived and served in the United States as sisters since 1727. So, be that as it may, I can explain to you sometime how the estimate was arrived at, but that's what we think. There is no dispute over the number of distinct congregations, which are over 400 today. So it was a big story to get our hands around. And then, of course, the large challenge became developing an exhibit that would be a professional in its features, in its tone, impressive in its collection of artifacts, something, in other words, that really would be acceptable to a museum like the Smithsonian, which became kind of the benchmark of quality for us. The exhibit that launched its 3-year traveling cycle at the Cincinnati Museum Center in May 2009 is a truly eloquent testimony to the intrinsic merits of the story and the resourcefulness of the planning committee. It was designed by a professional firm by the name of Cerruto and Associates of Pasadena, California. And it was funded, and this bespeaks in a few short words a lot of work by the committee itself, because we did all the fundraising. About 85 distinct entities provided funds for this exhibit. The largest single contribution was made by the Conrad Hilton Foundation in Los Angeles, which early on, when we approached them, gave $1 million toward this exhibit. So that was a tremendous boost. It was $1 million in matching funds, which we kind of argued against at the time, but we made it and raised a lot more than that in the end. The Catholic Health Association of the United States and a number of national and regional health care associations were persuaded to help. And to a lesser extent, religious congregations, because we did not think it right that they should have to come forth with money for this purpose, but some did contribute. And the Catholic Educational Association, some dioceses, some businesses. I think the largest contribution we got from a business was from Ziegler and Associates, based in St. Louis, that gave $100,000 toward the exhibit. So, the collection of artifacts, of course, is another story in and of itself. I can respond to questions about that later if you're interested. Suffice it to say that it used the latest technological methods for identifying a digital description of 5 artifacts judged by each congregation to be the most historically significant. Well, there were a lot of different interpretations of historically significant. We got a very interesting, way over 700 artifacts identified in that manner. And when you think that the ultimate exhibit has about 70 artifacts, you know the task that we have. The artifacts that are in the exhibit, although some of them are not in the Ellis Island venue, for 2 reasons. One is the configuration of the space at Ellis Island is really difficult. It's a long, narrow room, which are kind of white and black little tiles on the floor and slightly uneven ground. It's quite a challenge for exhibit builders. And the second reason had to do with the custodians of the exhibit not being willing to vouch for the safety of fragile artifacts because of the fluctuating temperature and humidity situations at Ellis Island. So first exhibit that I'd like to mention is actually the oldest, is the diary kept by the Carmelite sister Claire Joseph Dickinson during the ocean voyage in 1790 that brought her and several other women who had entered the Carmel in Belgium over to the United States, because it wasn't until after the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the Constitution and Bill of Rights that it was allowed for a religious to exist and to live in the United States. British penal laws and restrictions prohibited that up till that time. So they came at the earliest possible moment and kept a fascinating diary. It has a lot of vivid detail about that trip. And that really was the first religious order to be established in the nation's original 13 states. And alongside the diary is a page, which is out here in Ellis Island, from the Baltimore Carmel Archives, displaying the very first profession of vows in this contemplative order by a woman by the name of Teresa Carberry in 1792. So I know there are a few people here who have already been out to Ellis Island or have seen the exhibit elsewhere. I talked with a couple ahead of time. But when you start walking through the exhibit, you will learn something very significant about the sisters' influence on the concept of religious freedom in the newly independent republic. From what is arguably the most historic artifact in the exhibit, which is an 1804 letter from President Thomas Jefferson to the Ursulines of New Orleans. And the pictures that the communications people showed in advance here did have a picture of that letter from Thomas Jefferson, which, by the way, is represented by a very good facsimile. We use the original only at the Smithsonian, so that is another very precious and somewhat fragile artifact. The sisters, having arrived in 1727 in Louisiana Territory, had established numerous schools and hospitals in and around New Orleans. Very concerned lest the passing of ownership from France to the United States as a result of the Louisiana Purchase would entail the loss of property and ministries, the Ursuline Superior, Sister Marie-Thérèse de Saint-Xavier, wrote the president on March 21st, 1804. I love this letter. Asking that he assure her sisters of, quote, the continued enjoyment of their present property, end of quote, under U.S. law. She further asked that Jefferson confirm his assurance, quote, officially in writing, end of quote, and concluded her bold request in elegant French epistolary style with the words, with the most profound respect, Monsieur le Président, we have the honor of being your very humble and very obedient servants, the Ursulines of New Orleans. In a response, which is really remarkable for being the earliest presidential interpretation of the guarantee of religious freedom found in the Bill of Rights, Jefferson wrote, your property will be preserved to you sacred and inviolate, and your institution will be permitted to govern itself without interference from civil authority. He went on to guarantee the Ursulines all the protection which my office can give, concluding with an expression of personal esteem. I salute you, holy sisters, with friendship and respect. So the letter is a signed letter, well authenticated, sent May 15th, 1804. Well, as we know today, all the protection which the presidential office can give and could give was really powerless to prevent episodes of violent anti-Catholicism during the ensuing decades. The exhibit goes on to document a series of convent burnings, beginning with the mob attack of the Ursuline, here are those Ursulines again, the Ursuline Convent School in Charlestown, Massachusetts, in 1834. And we don't really mince any words or try to gloss over any problems in this exhibit, as will become clear from this part. The exhibit documents the sisters' internal struggle with slavery and segregation in a section entitled Prejudice Within and Without. A number of congregations, particularly those originating in the southern or border states in the 18th and early 19th century, owned slaves, as attested to by bills of sale dating from the 1830s, 1840s. Many more espoused segregationist attitudes that made them reluctant to accept women of African American descent as full-fledged members of their religious communities. Featured in this section are portraits of several women who set a heroic example of inclusive, nonviolent love during the antebellum era, despite mob attacks, legal prohibitions against teaching slaves, and prejudice within their own ranks. Teresa Maxis, born in 1810 of a free slave woman who had immigrated to Maryland from Haiti, and an English army officer, was a founding member of the country's first congregation for African Americans, the Oblate Sisters of Providence in Baltimore. Before helping to found the Sisters, Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the IHMs, in Monroe, Michigan. There, apprehensions lest her mixed blood ancestry become widely known and discourage white women from entering the community led her to return to the East Coast, where she founded another IHM community in the more tolerant atmosphere of Pennsylvania, eventually being accepted back in Monroe several years before her death in the 1890s. Elizabeth Clarice Lang, born around 1784, died in 1882, and her picture was among those that was screened. It's not among this little four-photo collage, but it appeared earlier. She was born free in the West Indies of a Haitian-born mother, emigrated from Haiti in the aftermath of the 1794 slave uprising in Haiti. The needs of Haitian refugees and Baltimore's African-American children emboldened her to open a school to teach black children at a time when it was against state law, and ultimately to found the Oblate Sisters of Providence, where she took the name of Mary Elizabeth. Her quiet and persistent heroism was recognized by the church in 1991 when Mother Lang was declared a servant of God as a step toward canonization. Henriette de Leon, a great-great-granddaughter of a slave woman brought to New Orleans as transatlantic human cargo in the early 1700s, struggled to realize her vocation to religious life under a deeply prejudiced legal system carried over from pre-Louisiana Purchase times. Although French colonial law, the so-called Code Noir, assured Catholic religious instruction for the enslaved, it forbade marriage between whites and blacks, or between slaves and former slaves, as well as their mingling or living together. Well, that was kind of hard to have in a religious community because you really do need to mingle. You live together. Determined to overcome racist barriers, Henriette gathered several other like-minded Creole women around her to found the Sisters of the Holy Family. The church declared Mother de Leon a servant of God in 1998. It would be decades before a Philadelphia heiress and founder of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, Catherine Drexel, would prod the nation's conscience and that of the church regarding its treatment of American Indians and African Americans. But Maxis, Lang, and DeLeo pointed the way. Drexel died in 1955, having expended the greater part of her fortune on schools to advance the education of Indians and African Americans, including Xavier University in New Orleans, the only Catholic university in the United States for African Americans, which has, by the way, produced more African physicians than any college or university in the country. Among artifacts in the exhibit are copies of letters she and the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament wrote to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1934 in support of a federal anti-lynching bill. The church declared her a saint in 1988. There are other fascinating artifacts in the exhibit pertaining to Catherine Drexel. Rose Philippine Duchesne, one of my favorite women in this exhibit, 48 years old in 1819, when she led a small group of French Sisters of the Society of the Sacred Heart to St. Louis, Missouri. She came with a burning desire to minister to the needs of the Indians in frontier territory. By the time she could fulfill this ambition some years later, by going to live and work among the Potawatomi Indians of Kansas, she found herself unable to learn their language. Her communication during the years she spent with them before her death in 1852, at age 83, took the form of ministering to the physical needs of the sick and dying. Whatever other manual labor she could perform about the camp, and many hours spent on her knees in prayer. The Indians recognized the great gift she brought them by giving her their own special name of Quackakanaman, the woman who prays always. There's a beautiful collection in the exhibit, but again, not at Ellis Island because of the fragility of the artifacts, of beaded Indian purses, blanks, and so forth that were given to the Ursuline sisters in Montana. So you just have to go to one of the other venues to see those, but they are very beautiful. Sisters shared the frontier experience. This is another big thread of our story, which makes it so wonderful that Ellis Island accepted this exhibit. There's a unique array of talents and resources that they brought to this country as immigrants. One of the most spectacular artifacts of the exhibit is a pigskin-covered trunk, which is stained carbon red. Not at Ellis Island, alas. But this was used by Mother Joseph Pariseau, who led a small group of Sisters of Providence from Montreal to the Pacific Northwest in 1856. And that trunk, but another one in its place out here in Ellis Island, ushers the visitors to the exhibit into the Pioneer Spirit section of the exhibit. Here, the civilizing role of sisters as they accompany the westward movement of immigrants is illustrated by a striking array of artifacts, from the measuring tools, calipers, and other architectural tools used by Mother Joseph. She built a lot of buildings out in the Pacific Northwest. She also did bookbinding work. She was a Renaissance woman, no doubt about it. And then another striking exhibit artifact in connection with this pioneer spirit is a beautiful harp, which was lunged across the country by the Sisters of Charity, who ended up in Leavenworth, Kansas with this harp, also a mandolin. They came to Kansas in 1858, so it was not an easy trip. Corn husk shoes, crafted from braided corn shucks, and worn by the adorers of the precious blood, sister immigrants from Germany to Minnesota. Kind of cold in Minnesota for corn husk shoes. And thence to Illinois in 1876. Do bear mute witness to the hardships endured by the pioneer sisters. A photograph, which did show up on the ones you have here tonight, showing two Sisters of Providence setting out on horseback on a begging tour in British Columbia in the 1890s to raise funds for a school for Kootenai Indian children, recalls the constant hardship of securing enough resources to support life and ministry on the frontier. Artifacts relating to Italian immigrant Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini carry the pioneer theme into the 20th century, as museum visitors admire the set of cutlery, knife, fork, and spoon, which Mother Cabrini carefully wrapped up, used during her 23 transatlantic voyages, always in second class. 23. Between 1889 and her death in 1917. One of my favorite artifacts of the exhibit is a 1906 pamphlet printed at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining by Italian inmates to honor Mother Cabrini for the outreach program she created on their behalf. These and other artifacts testify to the esteem that she earned from all manner of people in the course of a lifetime during which she and her missionary sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus opened hospitals in New York, Chicago, and Seattle, and charitable homes, orphanages, and schools in such widely scattered cities as Denver, Los Angeles, and New Orleans. She became the first American citizen to be canonized, for the church declared her a saint in 1946. No service to the nation diffused anti-Catholic prejudice or met the needs of as wide a variety of needy persons as did Sisters Care for the Sick and the Homeless. An exhibit entitled Courage and Care groups together many rare artifacts illustrative of the participation of over 600 sisters from 21 different communities, including the Ursulines from Galveston, Texas, who nursed both Union and Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. A letter from Pennsylvania Surgeon General Henry Hollingsworth Smith to Mother St. John Fortier and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Philadelphia, conveys to them his highest praise for, quote, the valuable services and Christian devotion to the relief of human suffering that marked their care of wounded soldiers during the war. Perhaps you remember, as you were waiting for the talk to start, the picture of the, 3 or 4 rows of sisters stretching across the screen, Daughters of Charity, which you might recognize by their elaborate headdress. That was Satterley Military Hospital near Philadelphia, which had well over 4,000 sick soldiers at any given time. Huge place. A note in Abraham Lincoln's hand requests protection for the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth during the last months of the war. Quote, let no depredation be committed upon the property or possessions of the Sisters of Charity at Nazareth Academy near Bardstown, Kentucky, January 17th, 1865. A. Lincoln. A letter written by Private Hubbard from Massachusetts, nursed by a Sister of Mercy, expressed a view he thought many of his fellow soldiers shared. I don't care what you are a mother to me. The sisters' compassion and humanity as they minister to the wounded on the battlefield and in military hospitals are touchingly conveyed by the medical bag used during the Civil War by Sister Anthony O'Connell of the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. Affectionately known as the angel of the battlefield, she always, I think this is a wonderful touch, she always included in her field kit a plug of tobacco to offer to wounded soldiers. The spiritual inspiration for the sisters' charity in times of war and peace shines forth in another artifact. It's a registry for St. Mary's Infirmary, conducted by the Franciscan Sisters of Mary. Their very first client, his name noted in the registry, could not afford to pay for his care. The sisters wrote his name in the book and registered him in the payment column as our dear Lord's patient. No charge. Other artifacts demonstrate the sisters' astuteness and entrepreneurial qualities, as with the lumberjack tickets displayed in the Care with Courage section. A community of Benedictine women in Minnesota became aware of a sizable population of lumberjacks who needed medical care but were in chronic lack of money to pay. They were always chopping off a limb or having some other terrible accident out in the woods. Someone had the idea of printing tickets, guaranteeing the purchaser medical care for 1 year in the Benedictine hospital for the price of $2. The nuns would then make the round of camps on payday in order to collect the $2 before the men could drink up their earnings. Sisters' contributions to medical and social services in the young republic took an unexpected turn in the 1880s with the response of Franciscan sister Mariana Cope to an urgent appeal from Hawaiian government officials to minister to those afflicted by leprosy in the islands. Cope relinquished her position as General Superior of the Sisters of St. Francis of Syracuse, New York, to open a hospital for patients suffering from Hansen's disease or leprosy in Kalaupapa, Hawaii, and spent the remainder of her life nursing those suffering from the disease. The self-sacrifice and bravery she and the Franciscan sisters who joined her in this work of mercy exhibited, coupled with the fact that neither Cope nor her sisters ever contracted Hansen's disease, despite years of hands-on nursing of patients, helped others overcome the stigma attached to the disease, as well as establishing a higher standard of medical care. Mother Cope was declared blessed by the church in 2005. Sisters regularly undertook the nursing of persons struck down by yellow fever and cholera, but fear of contagion led others to abandon victims to their fate. Featured in the exhibit is an anguished telegram from a priest in Memphis, Tennessee, to the superior of a community in St. Louis, announcing the death of one of her sisters and begging her to send no more sisters. Compassion overrode fear. More sisters went to Memphis and also to Canton, Mississippi, when yellow fever appeared there. In the end, 5 sisters died during this outbreak alone, the oldest only 28. And that was only one of many such cholera outbreaks during the last quarter of the 19th century. 2 of the most poignant displays of the exhibit depict sisters' care of orphans, right here in New York City and in Galveston, Texas. Discovery of a baby girl left overnight on their convent doorstep in 1869 prompted 3 Sisters of Charity to use the little they had. There's a lesson here for us. $5 at a donated building to open New York Foundling Hospital. From that day on, for decades to come, a bassinet was always left on the porch to receive abandoned infants, and you have a picture of the bassinet on one of your photos. Notes left with some of the babies have been posted in the exhibit alongside an authentic replica of the bassinet. Written on various odd-sized scraps of paper, the notes express the anguish of desperate mothers and their well-founded confidence in the sisters. I'll give you just 3 short examples. An undated note. This is little Augusta, born Jan the 30th, 1870. Oh, gruel, poverty. 1/14/89, 1889. To the sister. This child, 1 day old, will be claimed as soon as possible. How soon, I do not know. All expenses will be paid in full, underlined. Please take the best care of it, the best possible. His name is Willie C. Please do not have the chain and locket taken off. Let the child have it all the time so as to be identified, that no mistake be made as to which child is the one wanted. He was born yesterday, Jan 13th, 1889. A. Gemma. And no month or day, but 80 for 1880. This baby will be called for. I will have his clothing and some money to keep him comfortable each month. For God's sake, and for my sake, good sister, watch over him with a mother's care. When called for, the mate of this little pin will be presented. Willie Lavin is this child's name. God bless the archivists who preserved these notes for over 100 years. By the time the first superior of the Foundling Hospital, Sister Mary Irene Fitzgibbon, died in 1896, some 28,000 infants and many pregnant women and working mothers had been cared for. Thousands strong thronged the streets of New York to mourn the passing of a woman whose unceasing efforts to secure public support for orphans had earned her the sobriquet of the conscience of the city. Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word began caring for orphans in Galveston, Texas, in the wake of the 19th century epidemics that decimated the port city, leaving many orphan children. Many exhibit visitors, and I saw this again out at Ellis Island last week, are brought to tears as they view a film recounting the disaster that befell the sisters and their young charges on September 8, 1900. Situated as they were, very near the Gulf shoreline, the sisters had begun to feel some anxiety over the high waves pounding the nearby beach and the gale-force winds buffeting the orphanage. Still, they had no reason to doubt from their prior storms that the precaution of moving the orphans to an upper story of the stronger of their two buildings would fail to protect them. Younger children were roped to the sisters or to the older orphans for greater security in the growing darkness, while the sisters struck up the familiar seafarer's hymn, Queen of the Waves. Suddenly, the great tidal wave that drowned a sixth of the population of Galveston that fateful day toppled both orphanage buildings and swept all but 3 of the 90 orphans and all 10 of their sister guardians to their deaths. The film closes by silently scrolling down a list containing the names and ages of the orphans, the youngest only 2, and the oldest 13, and of the sisters, ages 21 to 45. All immigrants who left families behind in Ireland, France, Mexico, Canada, and Germany to mourn their daughters' deaths. A final heart-wrenching scene shows the annual anniversary gathering of Incarnate Word sisters and Galveston citizens to lay wreaths on the orphanage memorial gravesite while singing the hymn, Queen of the Waves. Sisters' impact on the country through education was less dramatic than their role in the life and death arena of healthcare, but just as momentous. Exhibits illustrate the chronological and geographic scope of their work as educators, as well as the evolution of curricula and teaching methods employed in academies and parochial schools, specialized schools, colleges, and universities. A rare sampler stitched by Mary Jane Hammersley in 1789, while a student at Georgetown visitation, stands out in an education section focused on vintage tin clicker, projecting statistics on numbers of students enrolled in parochial schools over the years. This exhibit, by the way, is a favorite with children at the museums. Children and adults alike are fascinated by the old-fashioned clicker and a collection of desktop props, including early readers, arithmetic books, and the Baltimore Catechism. Among other artifacts is a series of books with stereoptic cards and a viewer for kindergarten and first graders on reading and number skills, social studies, and forms and concepts of nature study, written by the School Sisters of Notre Dame. The set was in use for some years in both Catholic and public schools, while the Braille textbook developed by the SSMDs was used in the first school in the state of Wisconsin to mainstream visually impaired students. Sisters' groundbreaking work in the higher education of women is represented here by archival photographs of baccalaureate diplomas and graduating classes from the earliest colleges. I'm pointing out a few Ursuline things here which are in the exhibit, including the Ursuline College of Cleveland and the baccalaureate diploma it awarded in 1877. Numerous graduates of Catholic women's colleges whose achievements are noted throughout the remainder of the exhibit attest to the significant impact of these colleges on American society. Continuing the education theme, special panels celebrate the genius and sanctity of education innovator and congregation founder, we're not too far from here, Elizabeth Bailey Seton. Her decision as a widowed young mother of 5 to convert to Catholicism in 1803 led to rejection by her Episcopalian family and friends in New York, and to acceptance by the Catholic community in Baltimore. There, as she put it, like a bird struggling in a net, she worked through many trials in the process of founding, with 5 other women, the Sisters of Charity. The school they began in Emmitsburg set the pattern for the parochial school system in the United States. Mother Seton became the first native-born citizen to be canonized when the church declared her a saint in 1975. Another outstanding pioneer in education, Mother Theodore Guerin, founded St. Mary of the Woods Academy for girls, soon after leading a small group of Sisters of Providence from France to the wilds of Indiana in 1841. Within 5 years, she had obtained the state's first charter for the higher education of women and an envisioned St. Mary of the Woods College in Terre Haute. The Academy College eventually became the centerpiece for a cluster of ministries, including elementary and secondary schools, orphanages, and hospitals. The church declared Mother Guerin a saint in 2006. Credit for protecting the right of parochial and other private schools to function in the United States belongs to the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary. Immigrants from Montreal, Canada, to Portland in 1859, when the city numbered a population of only 2,874, their schools have multiplied with the growth of the area, only to have the state pass a law backed by the Ku Klux Klan, among others, requiring that all children attend public schools. The sisters' efforts to assert the right of families to send children to the school of parental choice, whether public or private, bore fruit in 1925, when the U.S. Supreme Court came to a landmark decision, Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, whereby Oregon's compulsory public school attendance law was reversed. Conscientious and often inspired commitment to achievement of the highest possible educational standards at all levels produced a system unique in the world for its impact and national significance. Generations of immigrants found their way through poverty and ignorance of the English language to full and productive citizenship with the help of the sisters. Women religious themselves became the best educated such group in the world. Their students went on to embrace lives of service and leadership in all walks of life. Featured in several small galleries, where the venue permits small galleries, out here in Ellis, it's all one long, narrow room, but very well installed, are women scientists, such as Dominican sister Dr. Jun Suji, author of The Soul of DNA, a portable incubator created in 1938 by Franciscan sister Pulcheria Wilder, using angle iron, canvas, wood, glass, and a sponge from a cigar humidor. served as a prototype for manufacture of the modern incubator. A number of women religious earned national recognition as artists during the last decades of the 20th century, most notably Corita Kent. She received her early artistic training at schools conducted by the Immaculate Heart of Mary Sisters in Los Angeles, before joining that congregation and developing the stunning serigraphic technique for which she became known in the 1960s and 70s. It was art with a strong social justice message. Memorable phrases in flowing calligraphy, accompanied by bold swatches of primary colors, proclaimed the need to combat racism and other social evils. Represented in the exhibit by the Love Stamp, which for quite some time was the best-selling stamp put out by the U.S. Postal System. She designed it for the U.S. Postal Service. Her silk screens have been acquired for permanent collections of major art museums in the United States and abroad. It was no coincidence that Corita's art and the ministries of many other sisters during this period were devoted to the promotion of social justice. Virtually all were graduates of women's colleges, where principles of Catholic social justice traditionally permeated curricula. A heritage of heroic women leaders dedicated to service and the righting of social wrongs offered compelling models. Concluding exhibit galleries picture the first religious to assume conspicuous public roles in the civil rights movement. Sister of St. Mary, Antona Emo, alongside Martin Luther King, Jr. on the historic March to Selma. With Sisters of St. Joseph, Roberta Schmitz, and Rosemary Flanagan walking just behind her. Oblate Sister, Dolores Bundy. She's that beautiful picture that you saw before the talk started of a black sister looking up. Pictured at a 1970 conference wearing a button that says, "I have a dream." Shared the dream of Oblate founder Mary Elizabeth Lang, as well as that of King. I've got shivers coming up down my spine when I talk about that one. Photos and filmed personal narratives highlight national advocacy roles assumed by a series of women religious directors of Network, the National Catholic Social Justice Lobby. Most notably, Catherine Pinkerton, Ann Curtis, and Simone Campbell, regarding a broad spectrum of social justice issues. Sister Helen Prejean's efforts to secure abolition of the death penalty are visually displayed through artifacts relating to her book, Dead Man Walking, and the Hollywood film for which she served as advisor. Wood and ivory carvings of Christ's passion and death, created by death row prisoners, further evoke awareness of the prison ministry conducted by Prejean and other sisters today. 9 sisters, including Ursuline sister from Cleveland, Dorothy Cazell, have been martyred in recent years in the course of working among the poor in countries of Africa and South America. A blue and white casket drape, one of 5 cloths donated by the Bishop of Monrovia to cover the caskets of sisters, adorers of the blood of Christ, murdered in Liberia, serves as a stark reminder of the self-sacrifice of these women on behalf of justice. Yet other artifacts call to mind sisters laboring abroad, as well as in poverty-stricken urban and rural areas of the United States, as medical doctors, parish ministers, and caregivers of all sorts. As they come near the exhibit's close, visitors view a film in which contemporary sisters describe what being a consecrated religious in the 21st century means to them. Surrounding the quiet viewing space in all of the venues except Ellis Island is a semicircular wall on which a comprehensive list of women's religious congregations is engraved. This is substituted for, out here at Ellis Island, as an adaptation to the space. You have to kind of look, as you go through the doorways that give into each segment of the exhibit out here at Ellis Island, right to the side of the doorway there are banners in which, in alphabetical order, are the names of all of the congregations present in the United States, including, of course, so 6 or 8 groups of Ursulines are identified in that list. Taken together, the personal testimonies in the film and the memorial wall constitute the peak moment of what is, for many, a profoundly moving exhibit experience. I have seen this at the Smithsonian. Some viewers pausing to rest their fingers on the names of various congregations that presumably have played a part in their lives, mouthing prayers of gratitude with tears in their eyes. Many who have taken the trouble to express their reactions to museum directors and exhibit planners speak of being uplifted in spirit by the time spent in the company of a group of great and holy women. Your own Archbishop Dolan, by the way, who gave what I'm told is a very fine talk at the private opening of the exhibit here at Ellis Island, signed the guest book that was laid out. You can find it too when you go. But when he signed it, he wrote only a single word by way of comment, which was, Alleluia. The picture that viewers carry with them from the exhibit is one of dedicated and resourceful women who created an unorthodox way of life in community that lent them strength as individuals. And spirited by the prayer and compassion for the poor, they created schools in the wilderness, hospitals, orphanages, and homeless shelters in every region of the country. They assumed professional roles as educators, nurses, hospital administrators, and college presidents decades before the feminist movement emboldened other women to do so. Activists and advocates for social justice over the years, they touched the conscience of a nation on behalf of the poor and helpless in society. It isn't possible to evaluate the exhibit, the strict meaning of that word, except perhaps in terms of attendance figures, which were approaching 500,000 as I give this talk tonight. Still, it seems clear from spontaneous reactions on the site and published accounts that the planning committee's general goal of inviting the general public to discover a world few have seen but millions have shared is being fulfilled in a manner far surpassing the committee's dreams. Stereotypes are being dispelled. The magnitude of Sisters' contribution to the history of America is being revealed to all who enter this very special exhibit. Citing just a few of the reactions that have come my way from journalists, general public, etc., this from Nicholas Kristof, who is an op-ed columnist in the New York Times. I've come to believe that the very coolest people in the world today may be nuns. The magnificence of ordinary church workers, priests, nuns, lay, lies not in their vestments, but and their selflessness. And that's just an example of some of the many reactions that we've got. So Ellis Island will keep this exhibit here a little longer than our usual touring exhibit time, on into January. From here it will go to Dubuque, Iowa, then to Los Angeles, California, South Bend, Indiana, and finally to Sacramento, California. So if you don't see it here, you'll have another chance. Thank you very, very much. You've been a wonderful audience. Oh, sure. We still have the stamina.
Thank you very much. We do have questions. Mr. Karen has agreed to take questions. Anybody have? Al?
Could Sister narrate the slides?
The first one is clearly the College of New Rochelle Library, not in Ellis Island. The other three.
This is the Sister of Providence of the Begging Tour.
Yes.
Up in Northwest Territory. That's the bassinet, New York Foundling Hospital. And that's the March on Selma, with Sister Antona Evo toward the front, Roberta Schmitz right back of her, and Rosemary Glading in the back of her. I'm told, and Steve Sweeney told me this right before we started, that you gave an honorary degree to Sister Antona Evo. She is still going strong in St. Louis, Missouri, where I got to know her. There was a question.
Yes. You want to, yes, put the.
Okay.
That's also from our archives.
Yeah, that's Mother Eileen.
That's the Jefferson letter. And this is the begging tour. I like this in March, but you can see the horse seems to have a brand on it that looks like a cross. And the Indian woman over to the background there has a papoose carrying thing on her back. This, I think, is Mother Catherine Drexel. In any event, it's a Mercy sister. There's the bassinet up close. And those are the Sisters of Charity at Satterley Military Hospital. Yeah. And that's Mary Elizabeth Lang, the founders of the Obelisk. But these are Sisters of St. Mary from Chicago. They're Franciscan group. Now that picture, I call it kind of an iconic picture, was used on the brochure that publicized the exhibit.
College of New Rochelle Library.
Now you're back to the College of New Rochelle. And this is Sister Dolores Bundy with the button saying, "I have a dream." It's close up. They asked her why she was there. She said, "I'm a sister, a citizen, I'm black, and I think that we ought to have our rights."
You still have a question? Oh, she got it.
Okay. A question that's frequently asked is, where will this exhibit go after it's through of its traveling tour? Well, if you stop and think about it, of course it will be disbanded. is you have to return the artifacts. Well, there's some of those artifacts that the Smithsonian would dearly love to have. I doubt that the communities will give them up. But our committee did go out and raise a few more funds, and we are producing a DVD of the exhibit, so I'm very happy about it.
Thank you very much. Oh, there's a question.
Before the DVD exists, is it possible for your remarks to appear on the LCWR website in connection with the exhibit so that people who cannot get to see the exhibit itself might at least learn something about it?
I have no idea how they're going to use the DVD once it gets produced. I'll certainly pass that question on to LCWR. But they do have LCWR website right now is a place to go if you want to tap into current publicity with regard to the website. I've got it here somewhere. Women and Spirit, so it's women plural and no spacing, probably on the brochure.
I think it's on our program. Yes,
Women and
it is.
Spirit novels.
Yeah, we put it on the program.
Good.
I want to thank you again for being with us. There is a reception outside, and we encourage all of you to stay, have hot chocolate, tea, coffee, and perhaps some more chat. And I want to thank Mrs. Karen for being with us again.